Again, you go back to this. What we want is people to train for 30, 40, 50 years. I don't care how hard you nailed it for 12 weeks. That's not what this is all about. Hello and welcome back to the Smart Strength Training podcast. I am Andy Vincent. This is podcast episode 44, and today I'm talking about the all or nothing mindset, and really to make sure we understand how to make this mindset work for you. Because if you're the kind of person that goes all in, and I see this a lot both when I start working with a client or chatting to people online, on one hand, it can be a real superpower to really focus your intentions on whatever you're trying to work towards, the outcome you're going to work towards. But also, of course, it's littered with pitfalls and traps, and it can be the one thing that gets in the way of making long-term lasting change. So I want to talk through some of those pitfalls, some of them more obvious than others. And then I want to talk about how actually there are some real benefits to having this kind of approach to exercise. And then we're going to wrap up by sort of talking about how we can modify this approach to make sure that the all or nothing mindset is focused in the right direction to make sure that we can put that intention in towards making lasting change, which is of course the aim of the game. So let's first up talk about the kind of clear and obvious ones when it comes to some pitfalls. If you're the kind of person that likes to go 100%, like you commit to a fitness journey and you go all in, you get all your sessions in, you've got that sleep routine dialed in, your hydration's on point, it's like a 100% commitment. Of course, the opposite can then be 0%. And for a lot of people, like progress or a lot of progress is going to happen somewhere around the sort of 40 to 80%, because this sort of 100% all in really neglects the nuance that we need. A good week or a good day doesn't need to be perfect. Someone could have really good nutrition habits throughout the day. They go out for their morning walk, but let's say they're busy at work and they miss that afternoon workout because a call overrun, and they get really frustrated and they end up ordering a takeaway, and that day feels like a fail, but actually the majority of the day was actually pretty good. Like 80% of the day was really good. It was just one small thing that makes that person lead to feeling really, really kind of frustrated. And the moment frustration kind of kicks in, it undermines the habit forming process. And consistency is the key to this. And to create consistency, there's going to be some imperfect days, some imperfect things that you do, because that's just the nature of it. What we want is weeks and weeks and weeks leading to months and years. So therefore, no one's going to be able to be doing that perfectly all the time. It's just not realistic. And creating lifetime habits are the key. And the problem sometimes with the all or nothing mindset is that kind of personality will get pulled into 12-week transformation, training for high rocks, where there's a very clear outlined goal at the end. And that can lead to quite unsustainable habits. And often those habits can, certainly around exercise, can be quite unsustainable when it comes to the intensity that people go at things like training really, really hard, maybe taking training frequency up, or certainly every training session ends up being like high intensity interval, hitting PBs, really, really crushing it. And that can be very problematic just from a sort of burnout standpoint. Like you go that hard at something and it's very hard to keep it going, because effectively when people go all in on training and all in on dieting, sadly all in on dieting often centers around reducing energy too much, and then training output goes up too high, and people just get really tired, really struggle to maintain that, and then of course they quit. And the problem with it all, and the biggest issue overall, is guilt. Any deviation away from perfect can feel like failure. And like I said, there's a need for imperfect reps to build consistency. And I mentioned as well, like we're looking to try and make long-term, lifetime changing sort of habits. So it's unrealistic, and it's not going to be practical that someone can smash every single week. So that ability to live somewhere in the sort of like 40 to 80% becomes really, really important. Because again, go back to those examples of you can have a really, really great week, got all your sessions in, nutrition was really good, got out for walks, you went out on Friday night, had a few drinks, you woke up hungover, frustrated, and then you sort of think, oh, screw it, I've blown this week. And then you kind of give up over the whole weekend and you start again on Monday. And people get into that cycle where they're kind of quote unquote good or they're as on it as they can be for as long as they can be. That could be 5 days, it could be 10 days, it could be 4 weeks. But at some point, that unrealistic expectation of perfection will be impossible to stick to, and then it drops off. So what we don't want to have is that sort of focus on everything has to be going full tilt, all guns blazing for it to be sort of seen to be a success. So potentially we need to sort of change what someone's belief around success really is when it comes to this. And that's where it leans quite nicely into, let's talk about some really important qualities for people that actually do really like to go all in. The first up is it shows a real sense of commitment. They have real intention. They care real deeply about the outcome. Potentially the outcome needs to be the thing that is tweaked a little bit. But that's a huge asset. When people kind of come in a bit half-assed, they've heard they want to exercise, they've heard on a podcast they should be working out and they should be sorting a diet out. It's quite hard to create sort of momentum when people go at it a little bit sort of like without fully focusing. So the going all in is a really great place because it does then create that momentum. So that commitment, that desire creates that momentum, and that really helps to build early habits. And momentum is key. If you want to stick to things long term, it's not impossible, but when people have really, really tricky sort of starts to thing, it can be quite hard to sort of stick to. So creating that momentum is really important. And by creating momentum, we also create mastery. That can be both exercise technique. It could be getting into habits around batch cooking. You might have gone all in on looking at recipes. So you've got yourself really set up with some really good recipe ideas. So those first weeks, months can be great because they create a base in which people can sort of really build off. And the most important quality around the all or nothing mindset is, in my experience, it's a highly trainable quality. You need to sort of like just potentially redirect the focus or redirect the wording around potentially what consistency means and adjusting that definition of success overall. So let's talk about how we can channel that all or nothing mindset to truly become a superpower and not be the thing that sort of trips us up. So I mentioned already that we're trying to embed lifestyle habits that we stick to. We also have to recognize that crushing it for 12 weeks is not the aim of the game. It's going to be years and years and years. So instead of thinking about being perfect and that expression, perfection, perfectionist, think more about becoming persistent. You want to persistently go after what it is you're trying to work towards. And sometimes when these outcomes are like, I don't know, certain amount of sessions per week, or it can be really driven towards losing body fat or competing in the Higher Ups Games or something, that sometimes can put a bit more pressure on what we're doing. So the persistence of it needs to be a bit more focused on, the long term, thinking about your consistency with sessions overall. If you're going for a 4 workout week and you hit 3, that's still a huge win because you've hit 75% of your sessions overall. And why it's important to have this sort of persistent approach towards things rather than perfectionist, that in a situation where you're aiming for 4 times per week, but you know that you just want to persistently chase consistency rather than perfection with it. Let's say it's a Saturday night and you've done 2 sessions up to that point. The perfectionist mindset knows that by training on the Sunday, they can only do 3 sessions and they still wouldn't have hit all their sessions. But by being persistent in the pursuit of consistency, that extra session on a Sunday pushes you closer to your overall, which is getting the full 4 sessions in. So you still hit 75%, and that 75% still feels like a huge, huge win. So we want that relentless persistence towards the consistency overall. And you can move this in directions around whatever goal people are working towards. I also, just a slight note on this too, is I like to try and make sure all my clients, in the context of missing sessions or not being able to get all 4 sessions into the week, I just tell all my clients to carry the session over. So the session is not missed. I think there's something around shifting a workout in the schedule or just replanning it is a very different mindset to missing that session, the 4th session, than coming in on a Monday knowing you've missed that 4th session. I have conversations with clients, they say, yeah, but then if I'm starting the week with day 4, it's a constant reminder that I missed the session. that is something to kind of like get over. You could, or not even get over, just work around. You could just rename your days. They could be like full body 1 or full body 2, upper, lower. So you're just staying in the flow of sessions. So it's not quite so clear that you've missed it, but just trying to break away from that rigid mindset of 4 sessions per week being the perfect way to train, because that's not the case. And let's say with nutrition, you're aiming to try and eat more protein. You want to try and get protein in all 3 meals. And if breakfast is off plan, let's say you're out for dinner or out for breakfast, and there was no high protein breakfast option there, that persistence in trying to make sure you consume enough dietary protein still means that you can get your protein in at lunch and at dinner. So rather than always having to try and make sure you hit every single one of those. Same with hydration. Hydration can be a priority, and you can be going very, very focused on making sure you have a bottle that you carry around throughout the day. So you really focus on the habits overall. And this leads real nicely into this idea of having some systems. Like the sort of person that likes to go all in loves events, and they love streaks. They love 30-day streaks. They love abstaining from alcohol for 3 months. And that's great, like never missing a workout, all those sorts of things. But then when streaks break, people often then stop because, of course, that's a massive blockage in the system or in the streak overall. Whereas a system can be a better approach because it can allow flexibility. So you can look back over the last, say, 6 months, and you can see how many sessions you did on average. And that data can be much more powerful than just the 4 workouts per week kind of thing. So zooming out on this kind of stuff is super, super important. And you go back to the idea I mentioned around getting 3 sessions in, and you train that Sunday. So getting that session in the Sunday. If you're really aiming for just like really good averages over the course of, let's say, a year, it makes getting that Sunday session in even more kind of motivating, because like, the more often you can turn up, the better it improves your average overall. And that's amazing, rather than sort of like stressing out that you can't be a perfect week, you can't get all 4 in. And of course, this all then brings into play this idea of habit formation, which is ultimately the entire point of all this. So your system might include having 2 or 3 workouts you try and prioritize per week, getting in a walk most days of the week. I mentioned protein, so you might decide you're going to try and prioritize protein in each of your 3 meals. You might stay hydrated by carrying a water bottle down, and you might be reducing your alcohol intake rather than trying to eliminate it. And you might even consider tracking your alcohol intake so you can see the average of units you consume over the course of a month, 6 months and beyond. And then things like improving your sleep hygiene. So in the framework of improving sleep hygiene in your system might be, right, I'm going to try and get into bed before 10 p.m. I'm going to set up a charge station outside of the bedroom, which will just entice me to not bring tech into the bedroom. So then you can focus on the system as a whole. So it can be the sessions, the protein intake, the hydration, the tracking your alcohol, and this sleep habit of having the station for charging outside the room, rather than any one individual task. You can think of it as you're not going all in on that system, but you've created a system you can put your focus on. And that's what's really, really important. That creates that awareness sort of holistically around all the things you're doing, rather than any one singular thing you're doing. Because going all in often ends up centering around a couple of things. It can be very much centered around training. It can be very much centered around nutrition. Then any deviation from perfect really trips people up. So sort of zooming out, having a system that incorporates lots of elements of exercise overall could be really, really smart. And then that ability to be flexible is, I guess, one of the hardest things, but also a really, really important thing. And this then really applies to training too. So recognizing that, I said already, going all in can mean hitting PBs, crushing your workouts. That can make people very, very tired. And there's something about going in and doing a session that might end up being like a 6 out of 10 intensity. It's still a part of the long-term sort of momentum piece, and it connects the dots from one workout to the next. So going into a workout, rather than having, right, deadlift's the thing that I've got to be maxing on, that's where I hit a PB. You might have a core exercise at the end of your workout, or a bicep curl at the end of the workout. As long as something has progressed in that session, you might need to hold off on progression on a couple of bits because you're getting a bit tired, but you might push your accessory exercises or your cardio exercises a little bit more. So we haven't always got to have these sort of focus points, being super, super dialed in to one thing. I know that a lot from working with clients. We see these big lifts like a squat or a deadlift or a bench press, and that's where we focus our PBs. And clients be saying to me, Andy, I'm not really getting anywhere. My deadlift's really stuck, or my bench press is really stuck. And then you just look down the rest of the workout, like, yeah, but your dumbbell chest press, you've got 2 extra reps this week. And I can see RDLs moving on very nicely. Again, it's that sort of zooming in. Or zooming into 1 or 2 things rather than zooming out and looking at it across the board. Because yeah, what we want, of course, is that ability just to keep going. And finally, there is potentially a need to sort of reframe someone's identity around it. Certainly when I start chatting to clients in the first instance, you hear them say, I'm the kind of person that I go all in. I'm all or nothing. That's just who I am. The more we use a language that really wraps our identity around this, the more it just becomes everything that we are. So rather than being the kind of person and actually almost like introducing yourself as this person and talking to yourself like, this is what I do, could you not become the kind of person who pays attention to their nutrition? Could you not be the kind of person that adapts their week to prioritize their training overall? Are you not the sort of person that just shows up to be consistent but not perfect? Because again, you go back to this. What we want is people to train for 30, 40, 50 years. I don't care how hard you nailed it for 12 weeks. That's not what this is all about. I know this sort of all or nothing mindset really gets sort of amplified in the industry because we do 12-week challenges. People do these sort of transformations. People train for events. All of that kind of stuff can exist in the framework of a long-term approach, but the approach 100% needs to be a long-term approach. And for anyone that is struggling to get into sort of like year-on-year consistent training, and as I'm talking through his podcast, you identify some of the sort of pitfalls with yourself, just remember that you want to be starting this now, let's say, or starting consistency now and keeping on going into your 60s, 70s, you're lucky enough to live to your 80s and 90s, keeping going with it. So sort of tell yourself there, like, does it really matter if you did a 12-week period that you didn't absolutely nail everything? And that is really key. And that goes back to the idea that anything we can do to zoom out, create systems that we can focus on, really put our attention on the system as a whole, that kind of like much more holistic approach to it with lots and lots of little things that we can focus on rather than elements that we go really, really dialed into. And I would say for anyone that is struggling, they feel like they're not doing what they should be doing. I feel like often they've just looked a bit too close at the minutiae of the singular task and they've not zoomed out and looked broader overall. And I'll be the first to say as well, I can't really remember what I did on a Monday. So we can forget very quickly that we are trying to, that we had really good weeks. And I understand why someone could get frustrated on a Friday, for example, that they've missed a session, which is why this kind of stuff can be quite good to just have a little tick list of things that you mark off. And people are very good with work or with the children of having like a list of things to do. Sometimes it can be very nice. Like, okay, I got my walk in this week. I got a session in this week. I reckon I hit my hydration that day. So you can just see kind of where you're at with it. That's not like a long-term thing you're always going to do, but it can certainly help to get into this mindset of having a system overall, having this understanding there's lots of things that you're trying to work towards rather than sort of like zooming in to a singular thing that you're working at. But what I would say is this can take time. It's a mindset that people are in that is kind of hardwired, so it can take a little bit of coaching to help remind people what the bigger picture stuff is. So that's the sort of thing that is really great to have a trainer help work you through. And if it's the sort of thing that you'd like help yourself, then I'm available for online personal training.